Kick off summer with Memorial Day savings at Lowe's. Right now, get 5 Scott's Naturescapes 1.5 cubic foot mulch bags for just $10. Plus, get up to 40% off select major appliances and save an extra $50 on every $500 you spend on select major appliances $396 or more. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 5/28. Mulch offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. See Lowe's.com for more details.
Blog Talk Radio.
The following broadcast is brought to you by the iGolf Sports Network.
Golf Talk Live is sponsored by the iGolf Sports Network and Golf Tips Magazine. Here's Andrew to tell you more about our sponsors.
iGolf Sports is a live stream broadcast and media production company providing quality programming designed to attract the golfing enthusiast. And Golf Tips, the game's most in-depth instruction magazine, including reviews on the latest equipment, tips from top teaching professionals, all designed to help you improve from tee to green. Welcome to Golf Talk Live with your host, Ted Odorico. Join Ted each week as he speaks with some of the best in golf. This week's special guest will join us a bit later. But first up is another great discussion on Coach's Corner. So let's introduce tonight's Coach's Corner panel.
All right, good evening, everybody, and once again, welcome to Golf Talk Live. I've got a great show for you this evening, as always. I'm going to be joined here by one single panelist here in just a moment. Unfortunately, we had a little bit of a change in Coach's Corner tonight. We're supposed to have 2 guests, and unfortunately, one ran into a little bit of a family concern and had to very graciously back out last minute. So we're just going to have one panelist this evening, but we had a great discussion. A little bit later on, I'm going to be joined by my special guest, actually welcoming back a special guest, Dave Shultz, the founder of Nextlinks. He's going to be giving us an update on some of the great things that he's been doing in his business. We're going to get sort of reacquainted with the audience a little bit and tell you a little bit about his history, and then we're going to talk about some of the new projects that he's been working on and some of the new groups that are going to be joining him as well in his projects. Some very interesting names indeed, and so you want to make sure you stick around for that. All right, I'm going to introduce tonight's panelist, and I think he's ready, and we'll bring him on. My very special guest on Coach's Corner, of course, is Clint Wright. He's a 30-year member of the PGA, one of the partners at TGM Golf. They're, of course, a big proponent of the R3 approach. And in my opinion, he's considered to be among the best in the short game and one of my favorite panelists here on Coach's Corner. So let me welcome my very special guest panelist tonight, Clint Wright. Good evening, Clint. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm sorry I'm running a little bit late. I had a late lesson and then got behind every slow car you can imagine between here and my house. Everything is good. I didn't get a ticket or anything like that. So we're here good to go.
Well, that's good. Definitely.
You know, and we've been with you. We've been with you so long now. Is that I'm closing them on 40 years. Not 30.
Really? Wow.
We've been doing this that long. That's a good thing.
Wow. Yeah, I think it was probably close to 30. That'd be about right because it was about 30 when you first started coming on the show.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
Next year we're going to be in 10 years, so I'll have to adjust that. I'll have to adjust that for next time you're on, and
we're good to go.
I'll 30 plus. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But always glad to have you on. You've been on, I think, since the very beginning when we started Coach's Corner. I think you were on the first season, and always a lot of fun. And you've been doing it so long now. I earlier on, for those of you just tuning in, I used to tease Clint a little bit about riding on the back of the bus, and he's definitely moved his way up, and I think he's in many ways driving the bus now. So always glad to have you on the show. As I was just telling the folks, John Hughes was going to join us tonight. He had to unfortunately back out. So you and I are going to tackle this. And here's really what I want to talk about tonight. And this is some golfers, have over time have kind of revealed some of the biggest mistakes that they feel are hurting their game. And I thought this would be a good opportunity for you and I to just have just an open discussion about this, especially since there's just the two of us tonight. And the first one we're going to talk about, And this happens a lot. I hear this, I have the honor of interviewing a number of different professionals, both women and even some men. And this is, I won't say it's in any particular order, but this is one that they see a lot in pro-ams, and that is not taking enough club. So whatever situation they're faced with, they seem to miss club every time. What are some advice that you would give our amateur golfers out there, what they should be really assessing? Maybe they're not assessing things correctly when they're out in the golf course, and this is maybe why they're misclubbing or underclubbing in a lot of cases. What do you think is the problem, and what do you think some of the solutions might be?
Well, there could be a number of things as far as making poor judgment calls. I mean, they could be misjudging the wind or what is uphill, downhill, a lot of different factors. But one of the, I think the biggest thing is that most amateurs I play with really don't know how far they hit certain clubs. Mm-hmm. They may think they do. And what they do is they go out on the range or try on the course, and they'll hit a shot, and they hit they hit a home run. Let's take an 8-iron, for example. They hit a home run, they hit an 8-iron 150 yards. Well, that's just, they're not going to do that every time because the 150-yard 8-iron is off of a flat ground tee box. They're not dealing with any uphill or downhill lies or anything like that. And so they get out there, and we have tremendous ability to determine how far away we are now, either by rangefinders or GPS or whatever. And they step up, throw up 150 yards to the flag. And they go, okay, well, I hit 8-iron. Well, it ends up in the bunker because their 8-iron consistent distance 8-iron is 135 yards. Right. If they look at the average, and there's a number of ways you can figure it. But that, to me, is the thing that gets in the way the most. Well, how far do you hit your 8-iron? Well, I'm not sure. But then when they do get it, they go to that home run ball, and they think that they can hit it that far the majority of the time. And so what I try to encourage people to think about is that, if you look at the way golf courses are designed, there's a lot of trouble in front of the green, but very little bit behind the green. And we've talked about this many times. Try to hit the ball to the back of the green. You can always putt it from there. But if you come up a little short, you got a sand wedge in your hand. So take the club that's going to get you to the back of the green. And to be honest with you, most of the time, that's going to give them a fairly good clubbing for the middle of the green.
Exactly.
Okay, that way, I think that the majority of the people in trouble, the simple answer is they overestimate how far they hit each club. Because most of the time, they're gauging that off of what we call a princess lie. Teed up on the practice range, flat ground, and that's what they think they can do in real playing conditions, which is not realistic. So I've always told, hey, hit it to the back of the green. Okay, you can always make a par from there. Just hit it to the back, and more times than not, you're going to be in the middle of the green.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. You're spot on. And interesting, just throw a stat out there. Amateurs tend to miss short about 70% of the time.
Absolutely.
So it goes right to your point. Is a lot of times they're taking their best 8-iron shot and assuming that's the average, and it's the top end, of course, of what they're able to hit that when they're hitting it pure flush and off as you say, a princess lie. But as you said, their average may be 135, so they're not factoring that in, what their actual average is. And most golfers, to be honest, most amateurs cannot tell you how far they're hitting each of their clubs, not even close. And you're right, I would always err on the side, and this is what most of the pros will tell the amateurs at a Pro-Am, is if you think it's your 8-iron, hit your 7-iron. Or what have you, whatever the case may be, because more often than not, you're going to be at least one club short. Because they think, they get out there and they see the pros hitting a club and they say, okay, well, I know I can't hit it that far, but maybe if I just go one club less. Well, most of these pros are hitting their, 8, 9, and even their wedges much further than the average amateur are. So it's not a fair comparison. So you might be 2 clubs less than what the pro's hitting. In some cases, it could even be more than that. It depends on the level of play. And so
the touring pro is controlling distance.
Right.
not maxing distance. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, so, always know your yardages, how far you're hitting your clubs, and that's the best use of your time out in the practice range is getting to know your yardage. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of ways that you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Your pro can help you put together some of those. The second one is confidence to close out a round. This is one, too. It's kind of ironic, when things go well out in the golf course, we start doing things differently than whatever brought us to that point. Pros often talk about, the boring stuff, taking one shot at a time, staying in the moment, focusing on the routine, whereas many of the amateurs, or the rest of us, if you will, we're focusing on the scorecard, where we should be focusing on one shot at a time. So what's a good way to, we obviously lack confidence, the amateurs out there, to really close out a round. So we've got a pretty good round going, and all of a sudden we're focusing on the number on the score sheet and not really focusing on what we need to be on the golf course. So what do we need to really be focusing on if we want to close out a good round?
Well, it's ironic that one of the conversations I was having today with a really accomplished college player, working with another instructor that we work with, but just having a conversation, and he was going through his latest round. And in his comments, well, I was 4 under with 3 holes to go. I said, you were nothing. You were nothing with 3 holes to go. So that was him. Okay, I'm 4 under. That's the moment that the thought process changes.
Right.
The minute you say, I'm 5 over par with 2 to go and I've never broke 80, is the point of transition in your preparation to play each shot. We can always say, be in the moment. You got to play one shot at a time. The question is how does your thinking have to be in order to do that? And the minute that you say, I'm 5 over with 2 to play, then if I can just go dang, dang, dang and make 2 bogeys, I shoot my best round, that is when your thought process transitions to don't make a mistake. You got a chance here, Billy. Don't make a mistake. And so it really comes down to a point that if you ever make that comment to yourself, you really cannot stay in the next shot. You're already at the 19th hole drinking a beer, celebrating your best round.
Right.
Okay. So once you make that comment, you don't stand much of a chance. So what I suggest for people to do, and this is difficult to do, is that you can't make that comment to yourself. You have to resist that comment, because you're really talking to yourself at that point, telling yourself what you intend to do. And what you intend to do is not make a mistake. You have gotten to that point by playing as freely as possible. Okay? So the only suggestion you can make, because it's not a physical thing, it's an emotional change in how you approach each shot. So unless we can give our students a way of staying in the moment, telling them one shot at a time, stay in the moment, yada, 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 is not going to do them any good.
No.
So what I suggest each individual to do is try to find their way of don't keep score, let your partners keep score, try to figure out you're not on the 17th hole, maybe you're still on the 13th hole. You have to find a way that you cannot make that comment. And once you can do that, and I don't have a prescribed way of doing it for an individual. I think you have to find your own method of not making that comment. And once you can do that, you have a chance of finishing the round out as well as you can.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And something else that I try to do with students that I've worked with over the years is, it's okay to write down the number for a specific hole that you've just completed, but don't add up the score. Don't know where you are throughout the round. So focus on each individual hole as though it's a mini round. Okay, I shot a 4. That's par of this run. I'm moving on to the next hole. Once you start keeping track overall of your score. And obviously there's certain situations where maybe it's necessary if you're playing in a scramble or an event with somebody, or you're foursome or whatever for some money. That's a little bit different. But if you're really trying to shoot your best golf, I think sometimes, to go to your point, is don't keep score. Write it down. Obviously, you are keeping score, but don't add things up. And you actually might be surprised when you get to the 19th hole that you shot a lot better round than you thought you were. Even if you got a few bogeys on there or what have you, or even some doubles on there, you're not going to know exactly where you are. And you've had maybe some good pars and maybe even a couple of birdies in there as well. So you might be surprised at how it evens out come the end of your round. But you're right. If you're sitting there telling yourself, well, I'm on hole 17 and I'm just 2 or 3 over and I got a good chance of shooting my best score, you might as well just stop right there and go in and have your beer, because you're right. You set yourself up almost for failure. And this goes to the next one, which they kind of work hand in hand. Number 3 is overthinking. This is something, that's an area, obviously that's one area, but actually during the shot and when you're standing over the ball, this is a common thing that we see a lot of amateurs doing, is overthinking the shot. Give us an idea of when we're ready to hit our next shot, what we should be thinking about and what we shouldn't be thinking about.
I think that, we use the term overthinking or whatever. I'm not real sure you can overthink a shot. I think you can think through it wrongly, but not necessarily overthinking. So if we get away from that and think about, okay, I'm thinking wrong, then how do I think right? Okay. So there's certain keys that we work on, and you watch, and this, and the people that are listening can watch on television. The players go through the same routine every time. And whenever that routine and whatever they have discovered for themselves, I remember years ago, George Archer used to pull up both pant legs, before he hit. Whatever you discover that keeps you thinking about process, and we've all heard this, it's cliche, process. But, I've been reading a book here recently about Hogan and about how precise his routine was. And I really believe that Nicklaus stood over the ball so long, not to see it go in the hole, but to feel his body relax. Those were the things they used to trigger their free swing. So I think it's a matter of you discovering step one to get ready, and it starts from the beginning. You're so far away from the hole. What club am I going to hit? The wind's blowing. I have to think my way through those things. But once I get through that, then I have to use it, pay attention to my setup, get myself ready to make a good swing. And then personally, what I do to relax the whole process is I take my hands off the club just before I want to take it back and then reapply them. Cut the tension, bring it back, and go. And I think that's the proper thinking, is that I want to be thinking about that feel in the process of set up, turn the club loose, and go. So the wrong thinking would be, I got to keep my arm here, I got to get the club there, I got to do this or that. More of a technical thinking. I want to see my students start thinking on what does it feel like. What does my body need to feel like before I move? Okay, and everybody's related to the whatever, but dancers don't think about the steps; they feel the music. And what I try to get my students to do is that we train, we get the motion the way we want it, but then we need to be able to recognize what my body feels like before I take the club back. Am I tight, relaxed, breathing? Those are the thought processes I want to go through. I want to think about how I prepare myself to make a good swing, not necessarily think about how to make one, but think about preparing for it. And that didn't freeze the mind up just to move.
Yeah, and you put in there as
it's
well,
hard,
which I
hard
think
question.
is extremely important, and that is a pre-shot routine. We've talked about this many, many, many times.
Right.
And this is why, as you said, you see the professionals on tour going through that process for every single shot. And what's interesting, which most people don't really pay attention because they're looking at the other distractions, is when the pros are going through the routine, if something gets them off their rhythm, they will stop and they will go through that whole process again. They don't just say, okay, well, I did a couple of waggles and I'm just going to hit the ball now. They will go through it. If something distracts them enough, which we've seen many, many times, Tiger was a great one for this. I mean, we've seen Tiger, mid-downswing, and all of a sudden he'll put the brakes on because a camera clicked in the background or something, or somebody, blurted something out, the neighboring green. And it was enough of a distraction. It threw him off the process. And he'll go through that entire routine again. And this is something that amateurs will not do. They'll go through the routine or start going through the routine, and then something distracts them. And rather than repeating the routine, and I understand we got to be cautious of slow play, is they'll just rush the routine the next time. They'll just say, well, okay, I'm just going to do this. I'm only going to take one waggle this time, and I'm not going to, check the wind, or I'm not going to do any of these things I did the last time. I'm just going to get up there and hit the ball, and end up ultimately hitting a bad shot. So, you don't have to have a 30-second or 40-second routine. You can do it, in less than that, but you need to go through it because that's going to prevent you from thinking about all the other things that you talked about. Another one I want to move on, at number 4, and this is one I know that is a specialty in yours, particularly the short game, and that is green reading. There's a lot of great apps out there that can help. Golf Logics, of course, has a good app out there that does that. But for those that don't have maybe accessibility to that or don't like using apps, what are some things? What are some tips when we're coming up now? We've hit a good shot. We're on the green. We're getting ready to come up and putt. What should we be looking at? What are some points that we need to run through our mind as we're getting ready to line up our putt?
Well, I mean, first thing that people need to understand about green reading is it's subjective. It's not scientific. We can use aim point and feel the low and the high. Those are informational gathering tools, but you still have to make a judgment call. And as you well know, too, many times the amount of break you play is dependent upon how hard you hit it and speed and different things. So, but as far as reading the terrain, if that's what we're talking about as far as reading how I'm going to hit this putt, then there's a couple of things that we need to get people to understand. One is if you're playing on Bermuda greens, there's grain, okay? And the way you kind of determine what the grain's running is that if it's kind of silvery looking, it's running away from you. If it's real dark green, it's running towards you. And as we well know, if the grain is running away from you, the putt will be much faster than what it would be if the grain was coming to you. Those are one thing. The biggest mistake I see people make as far as reading the green is only looking at it from behind the ball. Biggest mistake they make, because you cannot see the true slope if you're looking over it. Right. You need to be able to look into it. So let's just take a quick example. I got a 15, 20-foot putt, and I think it breaks, the slope is to the left. Then I want to take just a split second or two to walk down below that putt to the left to get a look, do I see slope? If it's there, you'll be able to see it from the bottom side of the slope. If you make the mistake of going to the top side of the slope, it will look flat. It's just the way it looks, okay? So if you're reading the green and you're behind it, you're looking at it, one of the biggest problems you have is when people look at that putt from that direction, you can't see the slope right or left, and most particularly if you're going downhill. It will look much flatter than it really is. So if there's one thing I could tell people about reading the terrain is always look at it from what you consider being downhill of the putt. You want to look into the slope, not over it. Right. That'll give you an idea, okay? Then as far as the putt itself, then there's the variables of speed and grain and things. But just the terrain, look at it from the low side. You'll get a much better look at it from there than you ever would from only behind it, or definitely from the top side. But what I would encourage people to do as far as speed and break is to try to hit a straight putt if you can. Mm-hmm. That's the first question I ask myself, and I encourage my students to, can I hit this putt straight? And then I'm going to plug inside the hole and try to get to the hole. Then, to me, the amount of break you play is a compromise for the not being able to play it straight because you can't hit it hard enough to make it go straight. You know, if you watch the tour players from 3 feet in, they watch the ball go in the hole. It's going in there fast. They're hitting it hard enough to make it go straight. They're not going to let it break. Most people do.
Getting a little bit, Clint, sorry about that. I just want to interrupt for a second. The signal's just getting a little bit choppy. I was able to decipher what you just said, so I think we're good. But I just want to let you know, I didn't know if you were moving. You're much better now.
No, I'm sitting still. Okay. It's what I said is that most people try to make the ball break.
Yeah.
You need to begin to think about allowing it to break, not make it break. So I see a lot of people that will leave the putt short, trying to hit it soft enough that it'll curve. Mm-hmm. What we need to start thinking about is hitting it firm enough to make it go straight. If you can't do that, then you have to compromise for a little bit of break. Aim it out of the hole. So 2 things. Try to make it go straight if you can. If you can't, then you have to compromise. Then read the terrain from below the putt, not from above it. Then I think you'll have a much better chance of reading greens that way if you can.
Great points, and again, I think a lot of times people look at things from a different perspective, and you know, we want to get as much information when you're on the greens, but sometimes I think people take a rather simple process, which you just described, and overcomplicate it, and ultimately end up doing things that are not going to be conducive to making good putts. So well said. I want to move on to the next. Yeah, I want to move on to the next one, and which is number 5, and that's bad tempo. You know, fast or quick tempo is fine, but ultimately what we want is a smooth speed. So, you know, if you look at somebody as an example, I'll give you a couple of different examples. You know, a smooth sort of a slower speed, or at least appears that way, would be somebody like an Ernie Els. Who certainly can generate a lot of club head speed, but their actual body movement looks very smooth and sort of equal timing. Then you conversely look at somebody like a Nick Price, who almost looks like he's jabbing at the ball, which he's not. He's just got a quicker tempo. How do we find, what's a good way to find our tempo? How do we find our own individual tempo? Because a lot of times we try to emulate what we see on TV, but that might not be the right tempo for us. So how do you, when you're working with a student, how do you help them find their natural tempo?
Well, I think you described 2 people that are obviously dramatically different in tempo, but they're also dramatically different in body shape. Mm-hmm. You know, Ernie Els, big, tall, you know, and, you know, Nick Price is stocky and tight, you know, so that has a little bit to do with it. I mean, it'd be hard to teach a guy like Ernie Els to have a quick pace. They're not going to have that. I'll tell you, some of the greatest things in technology today help this, is that, you know, there's things that you can find that will give you miles per hour now, you know, and find out how do you get the most out of your body motion. And encourage people, okay, let's go quick now. Let's see what our club head speed is. You go quick. Or, all right, let's go as slow as we can. Let's find out what the club head speed is then. And that's a way they can begin to identify what in the rhythm and the body motion, where do they get the most effect out of what they do. And once, and we work with people with their wedges and stuff now, like a lot, you hear a lot now. Okay, well, how far does your 50-mile-an-hour wedge go? Your 60-mile-an-hour wedge go? You know,
right.
And you know, we that's really a pretty good thing to work with people for their rhythm. It says, let's find out what 50 miles an hour feels like. And do we get anything out of that? Well, not a lot. Well, let's go to 70 miles an hour. Let's see what that feels like. and it gives them something to identify with. You know, one of the things that we've always had struggle with, and I agree with your question, is how do you help a person find their rhythm, is that there really was no way they could find it. It was, okay, I'm just going to swing at it. Well, what did that feel like? Well, we don't know what it really created. So now with the technology we have, with things you can hook on the butt of your club or TrackMan or all these things, you can begin to go, okay, well, now I know what a 70-mile-an-hour swing feels like. And I can start trying to duplicate that, because that gives me more distance than a 80-mile-an-hour swing does, because it's too quick. I don't get fully extended or whatever. So I find that the new technology helps dramatically with that, and it's not something that's overly expensive. You can find it out there in several different price ranges and whatever. A lot of your local golf pros have this technology that they're building into their programs now. And it's a wonderful way of helping you find it for your students. You know, I always used to relate it to learning to ride a bicycle. Is I can't teach you to ride one, I can help you learn it. But, you know, now we have this technology, identify for your student what that is that they just felt. And gives, I think, a better chance of them finding the rhythm that works best for them.
Well said, and you're exactly right. The technology out there now is as such that we can dial phenomenal. In and get a lot of the you get a lot of the information. It's very, very. But I think there's also even an easier way that I've found over the years, even for myself, but for you know, folks that I've worked on, and that is finding your balance. What I mean by that is, again, trying different swing speeds. And as long as you can maintain balance throughout your transition, if you're going too fast, a lot of times you lose your balance, or you get very your swing gets out of control. And when you find that you can consistently swing the club at whatever speed, whether it's 70 miles an hour, 80, 90, whatever the case is, and maintain your balance with consistency, that also helps you as well. I mean, a lot of times we see people, you know, trying to, they hear the pros are getting up to 120 miles an hour. Well, I know I can't do that, but maybe I can get to 110. And I see them working out. I see them doing all these drills, and they're just trying to whip the heck out of the club. But then their feet are falling all over the place. They're falling back. They're, you know, getting too far forward at the wrong time, and they're not really swinging within balance. And if you look at players like an Ernie Els and a Freddie Couples and Nick Price, even though they're dramatically different from one another, they're all swinging within balance and in their balance. So they found their tempo that works best for them, and they're also their natural body rhythm. And, you know, you don't see them falling over where we see a lot of amateurs doing that on the practice tee. So that's another way, too, that you can very quickly, but I do agree with you. I think with technology there now, you can really dial into on some of those numbers very, very quickly and get things going with your tempo. Another one here, number 6, and this is just, you know, this is more of an informational thing, not so much, but it will help your game, and that is learning not to be too hard on yourself. You know, golf is supposed to be a game to be enjoyed. It's certainly we're going to hit some bad shots or do some things that might get us a little hot under the collar. But I believe, and this falls into sort of the mental side of the game, is you need to get it out of your system and fast. What do you think about that? I mean, we've all hit some bad shots. We've, you know, thought about, you know, kicking ourselves in the fanny saying, you know, that was a dumb move right there. I hit a bad shot. I should have known better. And it lingers on for 2 or 3 holes. What's your recipe here? How do we avoid falling in that pit?
I'm going to lean on the internet again here a little bit and the technology that's out there. There's some wonderful data that if you go out and check it about what the average player does, how much time they spend and what they do with their time and how good they are. And I think that most people that play this game have an unrealistic view of just how other people play. And, you know, years ago, you know, we'd have beginners that would make them go play with the group. And they would come back in and say, well, I don't play all that bad, do I? I said, no, not really. I mean, you know, You're playing a little, so a lot of it is being aware of just what other people do. And unfortunately, is it all we see on the Golf Channel and the tournaments and stuff? We're only seeing the best players in the world. Mm-hmm. We're not seeing the foursome that tees off at 8:30 in the morning on Saturday morning, and none of them can break 95. Okay, so there's some great data out there now that talks about handicap levels. What's your handicap? Here's how many greens you should hit. Here's what your average score is. Fairway, how far you hit a driver. A lot of great data out there that we're using now with our students is, okay, all right, here's where you're at now. So if we want to be up here in this category, here's where we need to improve. And we take their data, about how many fairways they're hitting, how many putts. I'm more concerned about, as you well know, how many times they got the ball on the green with their pitch shots and how close they got it, and then how they putted from there.
Right.
So that data is real important to be able to get there. But the main thing, I think, is the unrealistic view of how most people play is far worse than people would imagine. We see it every day. They don't see it. But so I think one of the things you have to recognize, if you're breaking 100, you're not too bad. If you're breaking 90, you're well into the top, middle of the road. If you're shooting in the 80s, you're in the top echelon. If you shoot in the 70s, you're in 1%. And then they have to decide, well, how much time am I devoting to being better? And if they're just going out and playing some casual golf on the weekend and not really practicing or anything, you just have to realize, hey, I'm not putting any effort into this. I'm going to hit a few good shots. I'm going to hit a few bad shots. I'm going to hit a bunch of mediocre things. And if I can make a few putts today, I'm going to have a good round.
Yep.
But if they're really wanting to turn that 90 into an 80, then they have to evaluate where it's at, do some self-analysis. Where do I need to work to improve this? And then go to that area. There's a local pro, I'll guarantee you, that they go and say, look, I've analyzed what I'm doing. I'm putting and chipping terribly. Can you help me? They're going to say, yes, I can. Okay. Or if, I'm chipping and putting pretty good, but I can't get the ball in the air off the tee. Can you help me? Yes, I can. Be specific where you want to be. If you can't do that, then you just relax, enjoy your day, try to get as many good holes in as you can, and go on about your business. I mean, that's hard to get a person to do, but they have to recognize the fact that if they're only putting a little bit of time into it, they can only expect a good shots in a round, and then try to do the best you can the next time you play.
Yeah, that pretty much sums up, I think, what a lot of golfers, especially our amateur golfers, the category they fit into. We see this time and time again. They'll come to us and say, well, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. And then we'll dig in a little deeper. Well, how many, well, I'm playing once a week, but well, you're practicing or you're working on these things. Well, no, not really, or I don't have time. And then their expectations are unrealistic. And they're wanting a quick fix. What can I do to do that? Well, get home practice, number one. But like you said, isolate the area.
Isolate it.
And it's actually, it's very easy, actually. If you play around, I mean, you know how many putts you're making. You know whether you're hitting it into the fairway or getting it airborne. Whether it's straight or not, and you know how many shots it's taking you to get to the green. So if it's taking you 3 or 4 shots to get to a green, then obviously your iron play, your short game particularly, is not very effective. So you already know through a very quick analysis where the work needs to go. And it's whether or not you choose to put that work in or not.
Well, and I'll tell you, if you go to your local golf pro, they're going to appreciate you understanding that. Because we as instructors get these students, and it takes a while to get down to the meat of the deal. If you walk in and says, look, man, I got this data here, analysis, and I really need to work on my chipping and putting, that instructor, you just got them hook, line, and sinker because they're going, this is going to be a student I can help.
Yep.
And that is something that really engages the instructor because they're there to want to help people. And if you walk in there with a plan or an idea where you need the most help, they're going to appreciate that. They really will.
Yep, exactly. That's well said. And number 7, kind of follows into this as well, and that's, a bad grip and bad fundamentals. This is really an important mistake for a lot of people to avoid, especially for beginners. If you have bad fundamentals, your golf swing is going to get off on the wrong foot. And a lot of times, and we see this, it takes years for a lot of golfers because they get out there, and I think the biggest pet peeve I have is I will see a student that will get out on the golf course, they'll hit a bad shot, and the first thing they're doing is they're monkeying around with their grip, they're changing their stance, they're changing all of these different things while they're out in the golf course. So that by the time they come to the next lesson, they've got everything askew, it's all over the map, and there's no consistency. I would rather them play with what they've got, even if they end up having a bad round, and then let's look at the round, let's isolate the issues as we just talked about, and focus and drill down on where the problem is. Don't keep changing things around. I've seen people where we've made some adjustments early on in the process, and they'll default to an old problem, maybe a weaker grip, because it felt comfortable for them, and they're not used to working with a new grip. So they're defaulting back to areas because it's a comfort level for them. So this is something, as I mentioned, for grips and other fundamentals that are important, the posture, stance, and, of course, the alignment, to get them off on the right foot. What are your thoughts here?
Well, one of the things that we use in the R3 to throw this out is it's called a blending puzzle. And this puzzle has a what axis and a how axis. And the what axis deals with just what you're talking about, your basic fundamentals. You have to grip the club properly. You have to stand with balance. You have to get the club on plane. You got to swing it through towards the target. Those are your basic have-to-do fundamentals. And as an instructors are learning how to play, if you adhere to those things, your chances are just so much better of making good progress. It's just like I tell people about riding bicycles. The handlebar's got to be on straight, the seat on the right height, or it just makes the bicycle harder to ride. You can still ride it, but it's just harder. So if you're holding the club wrong, or you're standing, with one foot, here and there, and your hips are wide open, you can probably still hit it, but it just makes it that much harder. So what we encourage people to do is adhere to those fundamentals from the beginning. Good posture. You can go on any website out there and find these things. They're so universal that the proper posture is the same. You can look at any instructor you want to look on the internet, and they're preaching the same posture. You can look at it this weekend on television and look at their posture. They're all in an athletic position and being able to control what you spoke about a minute ago, their balance and movement. And those things have to be adhered to. Then the other thing that we tell people, you just have to do the best you can today with what you got there with. And then you finish, then you can make some analysis on what you did. You can go practice that and prepare for the next round, and then go perform again. The best players in the world do this routine all the time. They prepare, they perform, they make some decisions on what the performance could have been better. Then they go and prepare again. So there's not any preparing done during the performance. You've already prepared to do the play. You can't stop in the middle and correct it. You just got to get through the scene and try it again. And that's the thing we encourage people to do, because you've got a very good point. Then they go out and they hit two bad shots, or maybe one, they start fishing for what they were doing wrong.
Right.
And before they're done, the thing that they were doing right was the thing they're doing wrong, and the thing they were doing wrong they were doing right, and everybody's confused. And we as instructors have to start all over again. So the way you do that is you just got to, all kind of sayings, you just got to stay with who you brought to the dance. Whatever you showed up with the first tee at, just do the best you can with it. Make some decisions on what you didn't do right. Go prepare again, but always start at the beginning with your balance, your setup, your posture. I've seen many good players start having trouble performing, not because they lost their swing, they lost their ability to use it by poor setup.
Yep.
And
yeah,
when you
setup
get
is
their setup back around, around where it should be, their swing shows back up.
Yeah,
so
setup is
you're
so
right.
It's so important.
Absolutely.
I mean, I remember years ago seeing a student come for a lesson. They hadn't been for a couple of weeks, and so immediately we wanted to warm up a little bit. And this is going to lead me into the next question here. But
sure.
So I wanted to warm up and hit a few shots, and I started noticing something really odd about their posture. And I said to them, I said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Well, I'm hitting some shots." I said, "But what happened? We had a good setup here, and now all of a sudden you're leaning way over to the right. Your ball position's all completely different. You got the halfway to a motorcycle grip." I said, "It's completely different than what we've been working on." And he said, "Well, I played a couple of rounds over the last few weeks, and I was hitting this and I was hitting that and I wasn't doing this, and I have a couple of good shots, and I started toying around and I started hitting a few good shots doing it this way, but it wasn't, consistent all the time." And I said, "Well, that's because you're changing everything. You can't do changes like that in a round. You might be lucky and hit a couple of good shots like that, but it's never going to be consistent. And we need to find, your center, if you will, when you put this together." And this is what they do, is they do that mid-round, and then they start going through that, and something works for a little while, but it doesn't last because it's not correct. And this goes to question 8 here is rushing the warm-up. And this is something, and I don't know, you may have a different viewpoint on this, but we know that most of our amateur golfers never show up to the golf course on time. They're always rushing. That some of them might get out there and hit a few shots, but a lot of them whip up into the parking lot, they get their clubs out, they check in, and they're rushing to the first tee. I would rather 9 times out of 10 have a player, a student or what have you, spend time warming up. And I don't mean hitting golf shots. If they're not going to have time to hit a few warm-up shots or a few practice putts, I would rather them warm up, stretch for 10 minutes before their round than hit golf balls.
Yes.
Because at least that way you're loosening up. What are your thoughts here? Because that's something, too, that a lot of amateur golfers don't do.
Well,
they don't warm up, stretch, they warm up their body.
My attitude about this has changed dramatically over the last 5 or 6 years. Because I used to be able to just get out of the car and go. But now, and we see it now, the guys in their 60s are actually doing that. We can't go out and play and not at least stretch, get up and move, and and so it obviously is important. The best players in the world take hours to get ready.
Yep.
Not minutes. Now they got time. That's their job. Okay. But I do agree that if you're running close and you don't have a lot of time to hit balls, there's a number of different stretches you can find online and a lot of different places that recommend, but at least engage your muscles somehow to get the blood flowing a little bit. Now, I like to go out and hit 25 or 30 balls. That was what I would like to do. Now, do I do that all the time? Well, no, not often, but I try to as much as I can. But you definitely have to stretch. Making 2 or 3 hard swings on the first tee to loosen up is not getting it done.
No.
I mean, you may hurt yourself doing that. But you see a lot of guys, you grab the cart. There's a number of different things, stretch your back. There's tools and aids that we see now where you can the pole and bend and stretch and get it engaged somehow. But you have to activate your muscles. Now, obviously, if we could activate them making some swings to also find a little rhythm, not necessarily go out and try to make a better swing, but find that pace and rhythm we talked about earlier, reacquaint yourself with that. I mean, I think that's the optimum thing to do. But you're absolutely correct. If that's what you can't do, you at least need to grab a hold of the top of the golf cart and stretch it out a little bit. Engage that muscle, get a little blood flowing where you got a chance of making a flexible swing.
Right, because what I see a lot of times happens is these guys will literally be flooring the golf cart down to the practice tee. They've got less than 10 minutes to make it to the first tee. They'll throw down 2 or 3 balls, and they'll just rake one, hit it, rake another one, hit it. They're not really going through any sort of a routine. They're not doing anything,
correct.
And they think that's going to be helping. That's the worst thing you can do. I would rather you not hit a single ball or tap a single putt, but get out there and stretch and warm up your muscles, get everything stretched and working properly. And then when you're waiting for your turn and getting ready for your group, you can obviously you want to be back a safe distance. You can swing the golf club and just feel that rhythm, start developing that natural rhythm. I would rather you do that. Take a good 5 to 10 minutes of stretching, warming up before you get up there and hit the first shot, than trying to rush to the practice tee and hitting a couple of putts and maybe 2 or 3 shots out there with a wedge and maybe a drive or 2 even, and think that's going to be an effective warm-up, because it's not. You're not doing anything.
I agree.
Yeah, and we see that too much. And I knew that's it's a simple thing, but you'd be surprised at how many people. I'm actually going to be playing in an event tomorrow, and I can guarantee you that's going to be something I'm going to see a lot of. So I'm going to try and encourage some of the folks that are going to be playing in this event to do just that. If they're showing up late, don't waste your time going down trying to hit balls when you're going to be teeing it off in a short bit of time. Here's some other things you can do. Number 9 is another good one too, is playing the wrong tees. This is something Jack Nicklaus talked about, much later in his career, of course, is seeing so many amateurs playing from tees way, way back. I think it's time for us to recognize that, hey, if you're having troubles breaking 100, why are you playing the championship tees, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I think if you're playing, we saw this. We made a trip out to Branson, Missouri, to play at Big Cedar Lodge, where Paynes Valley course and all that stuff is. And these golf courses are tremendous. And we played behind a group. Now, this is a resort, and there wasn't a player in there that could break 100. We're playing from the middle tees, and we're proficient players. They're playing from the back tees, can't break 100. Now, why do they do that? Well, they pay $200 to play. They're going to play the whole thing,
I was just going to say that.
Okay, they're just going to play the whole thing. The hell with what they shoot. I paid my money. I'm going to play the whole thing. But if you want to do that when you're on vacation and resort, just be mindful of the people behind you. Right. But on a regular basis, you're playing at home. Okay, we have a lot of guys now playing combo tees. Some holes are too long for them to play from the back tees. Some holes are too short from the next tees. So we get them playing combos back and forth. And that's a little new thing these days. But I think that's a really smart thing to evaluate. Because, I like to play from the course we play the majority of the time, the blue tees, the back tees is where we play from. But it's not a long course. But if I play from the white tees, a lot of the holes were too short. Okay? Mm-hmm. But from the white tees, some of the par 3s are really good length holes for me. So that combination type thing is very helpful to give a person a bit of a challenge, but not make it so easy that they're not, there's no challenge to it. But if you play that combo kind of thing, it's more enjoyable. It's more fun. I don't need to play 230-yard par 3s anymore. Right. Okay. But I do like to play a 200 or a 425-yard par 4. I can play those. Mm-hmm. So we a lot of times play the par 3s from the middle tees, the rest of the holes from all the way back. So, but that's just us. But on a regular basis, I think I would prefer to see a person start from the forward tees. Mm-hmm. Okay? Just go play the forward tees. We won't call them red tees, ladies' tees, whatever you want to call them. Go play from those one day. And evaluate, well, did you have any fun playing from there? Was it too short? Did you hit all 3 woods and wedges or what? How did that work out for you? Then, maybe one hole play that, then back up again. Okay? I don't see too many people going forward. I prefer to see people coming back. Start from the shorter tees you think would be too short. Work your way back until you find that balance. And keep in mind, it could be a combination of 2 or 3 different tees. Mm-hmm. The golf course is different. You can, if you're playing the same golf course, a lot of times you can make those evaluations very quickly. And then that's the way your group plays. And, we play a lot of times where we've got 4 players or sometimes 5 playing from 3 tees. Okay?
Yeah.
Because we just got different variety of players, and there's not this thing, well, I got to play back there. It's some ego thing. They play from the tees they're supposed to play from. And so, but you have to determine that, and I'd much rather see a person go too short and then back up than to go too long and try to, work their way back up to the green tees or the white tees or whatever it is. So, but it is a problem to see it,
Oh yeah, and Nicholas talked about that. He said, "Look, move up." Even he, obviously not in regulation play, but even he's moved up.
Sure.
And he recognizes that his game is not what it was, 20, 30, 40 years ago. He doesn't hit it as far anymore, and
right.
His accuracy is not the same. So, there comes a point in time. You're right. You have to put the ego, and you were spot on in the early part of the question, and that is when these guys are going, they're paying $150 or $200 at a resort.
Yeah.
By God, they're going to play all 7,800 yards at a resort.
That's right. They're going to play every inch of it.
Right, exactly, and it's an ego thing. And you know what? I would much rather go out there and hit some good golf shots, have some fun, and have a few laughs than sitting there fishing for balls half the time and looking here and there because I don't know where it is or I can't reach my target. And that's what the last one we're gonna tackle real quick here, and then we've got to go.
Okay.
And that is not committing to the shot. What does that mean? Essentially, it means making a decision and not second guessing. So if you're not sure about the club or the shot you've chosen, start again. Go through the process again until you're comfortable. But once you've made your choice, it's go time, right?
Well, absolutely. And the strange thing about that question, very quickly, is you find the person shooting 100 are much more committed to their shots than the guy that's shooting 80.
Yeah.
And not to be funny, they just don't know what non-commitment is. They pick out the club and they're gonna whack it. They're gonna get their money's worth. So they take that 3-wood out and they give it a go. Okay. You start seeing the guy shooting 80 go, well, should a layup or what? They start overthinking it, and then they're not committed to the shot that they want to hit. But the 100 shooter guy, they're committed to every shot they swing at. They're in there. They're taking that driver out, and they're going to bust it down the fairway. They're committed. But it seems to me that problem becomes more and more prevalent when you get a player that's shooting 75 or 80 or trying to be better. That's when they start second-guessing themselves, is this the right thing to do? But the thing they have to do, in my opinion, I want them to play like the guy that's shooting 100.
Right.
Okay?
Well,
they have much more information, Go ahead and pick out the 7-iron and go.
Right. I think the guy that shoots 100, I think the difference is he's just happy if he hits a good shot. He doesn't expect it. His expectations are much lower. He knows hey, if I get it out in the fairway, I'm pretty happy about that. Or if I get it on the green, I'm really happy about that. Where the guy that's trying to break 80, it becomes more strategy. Okay, well, what do I got to do? How do I navigate this? Because I don't want to mess up my good round here. And so then they, again, as you said, they're overthinking the process. So commit to the shot. Decide what shot it is that you're going to hit, what you need to hit here, what club you're going to use, and then commit to it. Even if it doesn't come out the way you want it to, you can use that as an opportunity to learn from that. Okay, I misclubbed that one. I chose the wrong club, or the shot I was trying to get was not realistic for my ability. So you put that into your list of what we're going to talk about with the teaching pro or the coach next week when we go in and say, here's something I did last week. That's a teachable moment. So, anyways, great discussion tonight, Clint.
I loved it.
I really enjoyed that. Yeah, very, very interesting. I think we covered a lot of areas. And those are a lot of common questions that many of our amateur golfers get faced with out there. They might seem very simple to some better players out there, but you'd be surprised at how many of our golfers fall into those traps that we talked about tonight. But as always, I'm going to give you a quick moment if you want to share with the folks best way to reach you, and anything, if there's something you want to plug, go ahead.
Oh, we're doing great. We plugged everything we need to. But if they want to get a hold of me, it's clintgolf001@yahoo.com, or they can Facebook message me at the third shot golf. Any way where they can. And I always enjoy these things, but we did. That was great tonight. And like, if we want to leave one thing, make a choice like a good player and swing like a 100-shooter, and you'll get some. You'll have it going. That's great.
You know what,
so, Ted, I enjoyed it.
I think some of the 100 shooters have more fun than the guys trying to break 80.
Without
at least
a doubt.
All right, Clint, have a great weekend.
Take care.
Thank you as always, my friend. I'll see you next time here in Coach's Corner.
Very good. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. All right, that was Clint Wright joining me on the Coach's Corner panel tonight. We're going to be speaking with our very special guest tonight, Dave Shultz, founder of Nextlinks, here in just a moment. But we're going to take a quick break as we're running a little bit long here, and we'll be right back, and I'll introduce my special guest tonight.
This edition of Golf Talk Live is brought to you by Golf Pal, the best place to find only the finest in golf training aids and accessories. Get in on some great deals on leading products such as Down Under Board, Rapsodo, Golf Slingshot, and more. Visit golfpal.golf today. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter. Golf Pal. We're serious about your game.
The following ad is sponsored by Golf Tips Magazine.
Are you tired of being short off the tee? And what about those 3 putts? Forget about it. It's time you got serious about your game. Golf Tips, the most in-depth magazine in the industry. For over 30 years, Golf Tips has delivered expert content such as the latest golf instruction from America's top pros, simple-to-follow practice and game improvement drills, fitness and mental game tips, equipment, training aids, accessory and apparel reviews, golf destinations and travel tips for every budget, and so much more. Don't miss a single issue. Go to golftipsmag.com and subscribe today.
All right, very excited to have this evening's guest join me once again. He's been here several times on the show, and always a fun guest to have on. Of course, I'm talking about my good friend Dave Shultz. He is the founder of Nextlinks, veteran technologist. He followed his passion for golf and began working to realize his vision for Nextlinks, immersive golf experiences designed to make golf accessible to beginners as well as seasoned golfers. Spent more than 2 decades as an electrical engineer and operations executive at General Electric, as an aviation electronics technician in the United States Navy. Discovered a knack for problem solving and on the avionics systems of the A6 and FA-18 aircrafts. The seasoned technology was also a key team player on the Boeing 787 development project while at General Electric. Nextlink is his current project. He's been working on this for a number of years and has some great things that he's done with this business over the last several years. We've talked about it many, many times. He's got some new interesting things that we're going to talk about tonight. So without further ado, please welcome my very special guest, Dave Shultz. Good evening, Dave, and welcome.
Thanks. Great to be here again. I'm looking forward to chatting. There's a lot to talk about. A lot of progress has been made.
I agree. That's one of the fun things about having you on the show is every time you come, you've made a whole heck of a lot more progress and things just keep moving forward. So let's just talk about a little bit about, I gave you the folks a little bit of info on your background. You obviously were involved in avionics and working on aircraft when you were in the Navy and things like that. But how did you transition to having an interest in golf? I mean, I know you're an avid golfer. Maybe talk a little bit about your earlier experiences as a golfer, as playing the game and enjoying it, and how it led to you developing and coming up with Nextlinks.
Yeah, I mean, I've loved golf, since I was about 10 years old. I played my first round with my grandpa at the Ohio Valley Inn and Country Club. He was an avid golfer and a global business guy, and really, my idol in a lot of ways. And he spent a lot of time with me, and I just got the bug, right? So I just, he took me out on the golf course when he was playing, and he'd just let me hit, an approach shot or a drive. I wouldn't play the whole round, but it gets in your head, and it makes you want to do it. Now, I heard your last guest at the beginning talking about don't say it out loud. I remember when I was first, getting close to breaking 80, 5 over with 2 to play. It's so funny. It starts going in your head, internally, and as soon as you actually vocalize those words, that's the end of your chances of getting there. So it's there's a lot to be said for that, about just focusing on the next shot and not thinking too much about the score. But, I've just loved golf forever. I was in corporate America, I would get invited out with a lot of the executives to play because I was a pretty good player and they enjoyed playing with me. And, you just realize how much access, having the skills of the game can bring you in the corporate world as well. And so when, in 2015 on St. Patrick's Day, I was playing with my son, Ethan, who was a senior at Sonoma State, 21. And, his freshman year, I took him to a golf course and I said, if you ever want to play in college, you're going to have to get a job at a golf course. So he did. Mm-hmm. And, he got down to, single digit handicaps and shot like 75 and I shot like 95 and, just sort of started cursing the access that, the lack of access for players to, have something where they can keep their skills active so that they don't have to play as many rounds in a year, but when they do play, they can perform to the level that they'd like to be able to perform, because it's, a full round of golf just takes a long time. And so I was just thinking about new forms of access and then, saw the driving range entertainment model back in 2014 is when, Top Golf really began to scale. And, and just, I just woke up the next day. I said, Eth, what do you think about creating a new game, where you play all your full swing shots into a screen and then at some point, call it 20 yards, 30 yards, 40 yards, whatever, you as soon as your ball gets in that range, you switch over and you play real golf on a real playing field and sort of just, use the simulators to get rid of the fairway. You could create a much smaller format game and yet, the entire game would still be available, soup to nuts on just a much smaller playing field. And he looked at me, he goes, Dad, that's a really good idea. And, usually your 21-year-olds don't. And then the way I was describing it is, his girlfriend, who became his fiancée and his wife now, at the time, though, she looked at me, she goes, well, I don't even golf, but that sounds like a lot of fun, right? And so, I saw that early, adoption, sort of energy from a generation that really, has the opportunity to take advantage of golf in new ways with the advancements of technology. And so that idea just sounded so good, I couldn't get out of my head, and I just started developing it. That's what I did for a career, is develop, industry needs, right, ideas into industry products, solutions. And so for me, this, this big arena that we're now bringing forward was sort of my self-assigned product development project, right? So it's been a long journey to get it ready to go start, putting the brick and mortar to it, but, now it's going to happen. So it's pretty exciting.
And we're going to talk about that here shortly. What I want to go back to real quick is something that you said, and that is really sort of scaling golf in a different way. You and I grew up in an era when the country clubs and obviously resort golfs were happening, and 4 to 6 hour rounds were not unheard of, and still in some cases are still the norm. But what's interesting is, because of groups like Top Golf and others, but particularly Top Golf, when they came into the scene, they approached it from a different thing. And what was really interesting is, as I know you know this, Dave, I'm editor and publisher of Golf Tips magazine, and I did a issue, not this current one, but the one before, and talked about the millennial golfers particularly. And they really like that Top Golf, that type of model, because they don't have their time is very, very valuable. They don't want to go out necessarily and have the country club experience. They're looking more of an entertainment experience. And you came out with very early on with really, I think, a great property out in Mesa, Arizona. And I want you to talk about that before we get into the other, what you're working on now, because you really took a lot of that vision that you had and created something that was more of an entertainment, but still has some of the concepts, if you will, of traditional golf, but made it even that much more fun. Talk a little bit about what I'm referring to.
Yeah, I mean it's really like adoption. So we went, in 2015, I had the idea. By November of 2015, I was ready to quit my job, and that was not an easy decision. And found an angel investor, and then, shortly after we got going, I was pitching to casinos and whatnot, and went up to Washington and pitched to a Native American tribe up there, and they got so enamored with the idea because of the potential to have indoor gambling and indoor gaming that they actually gave me a $250,000 deposit and talked about building a $10 million space renovation inside their casino. At the time, I thought it was going to happen because they gave me this money to go further develop the technology. But what I did is I took that money and we moved into a lab in Santa Ana and spent about 2 years building this connected game between the simulators and the putting greens. And, the challenge there was how are you going to make that transition, right, and still have a cohesive game? And, because I was thinking about scalability, I was looking for something simple that was already available. And I was watching Dancing with the Stars a lot back then and saw those overhead, sort of spotlights that spin around on gimbals, right, and just, point everywhere, and they all were in sync with each other. And I'm like, well, you can control those. They can act like a little pointer, right? So what if I just use those to identify shots on a putting green and then use the second beam to, hover literally over a cup to tell you that's your target? Then I don't need flag sticks or numbers. And so just came up with this little 2-beam of light way of getting out of the simulator onto the putting green. And then we started creating just putting green games, right? We created this thing we call the 9-hole challenge, which is it's called the Nextlinks challenge, but it's our favorite 9 putts on a really, finely contoured green we created in the lab. And we defined these 9 putts that we thought we'd never get tired of and turned them into a game, using our spotlights and a kiosk that goes next to the green. And we played that game for over 2 years and we never got tired of it. I still miss it. The course record was 12, on a par 18. Right. And what happened is the city of Indian Wells showed up at our doorstep and they were looking to monetize their existing golf club at night. And they already had, a set of greens out there that they had built that were really nice and they were never getting used. And they saw our spotlights and they said, hey, what do you think about just turning our greens into a nighttime outdoor party? And at that time, we really had no idea if our equipment would work in the elements, how it would go. And, we didn't really have these games invented yet that people are playing out there. But, of course, we just said, yeah, let's do it. And, about a year and a half later, they spent, $400,000 with us to lay down this infrastructure, had their grand opening in 2018, made like $1 million in the first year. And, here we are we're going into season 4 now, and they've already got 20 or 25 special events pre-booked for the season. It's just been a big, huge success. And then, what you're talking about in Mesa was sort of the next level of that. We ended up under a canopy there. Unfortunately, our partners there succumbed to the COVID. So they're not actually operational right now, but there's more to come on that story. But what I was able to do with Phoenix and Mesa while it was open was bring, potential partners out there and show them how the tech worked in this environment. And these were synthetic greens, whereas in Indian Wells we were, doing it on a traditional turf setup. So in Mesa, we built our own synthetic greens that sort of mimicked what we did in the lab. And honestly, where we're at today was really a result of Mesa existing because, Augustine Pisa, who's now our golf design partner and a, very close friend now, he came out there and visited me because he saw what I was doing, and he's designing, he's really known for sort of advancing the game with new formats, and he's a real pioneer and visionary on golf course design in new formats. And so we came out there and started talking about the tech, and he saw the venue, and he got real excited about how he could apply our tech on some of his work. And, that one thing led to another, and, he partnered up with Brandel Chambly, the Golf Channel analyst. And he said, Brandel lives in Phoenix. Why don't I send him out there and meet you? And that's when I really started getting excited because Brandel came out and he spent an hour with me. And, it was a Saturday afternoon and there was people out there playing, having a good time. So all we did is we really sat there and just watched the people and, the different demographics that were playing. And, I explained the games that they were playing to them. And then before we left, I just said, Brandel, the only thing I really want you to do, we put a lot of thought, a lot of time, a lot of energy into creating greens that, really mimic true greens out of synthetics. And, they roll real fast, like 11 or 12 on the step meter and real true, like a real putting green. At least that's our opinion. So I gave him 3 balls and a putter, and I said, I'm not even going to watch you. Just, take some shots and let me know what you think. So he spent 5-10 minutes putting, and he comes back over. He goes, Dave, I literally just got done putting greens in my backyard, and I enjoyed putting on these greens more than I enjoy putting on my own greens. And I spent. By the way, I spent a lot of money on those greens.
Right.
So he said you've definitely, the passion you had for trying to recreate the playing surface paid off, right? And that was something, we put a tremendous amount of thought in too. So I had those relationships going. And then what really, triggered where we're at now, that, the original concept was reality golf, and then it kind of morphed and we started working on these derivative products that we were just talking about. But what really, the real excitement started in November of 2020, when Augie got a inquiry from one of his clients in the Middle East asking if he designs entertainment centers, and that sort of began the what used to be Reality Golf is now Nextlinks e-golf arenas, and we'll talk more about that.
So you brought in Augie into the fold. You've now brought in Brandel for his input and gotten them involved. So you're really approaching this from a perspective of all aspects of golf, not just the design and what you've done, but you're getting Brandel's experience as well. Not only obviously now currently a golf analyst, but he's been a player, so he knows what people look for in their golfing experience. So he's able to bring a lot. Talk about his additional input into this, what you're really looking for from him, and what he's hoping to help you along with, and then we'll get into Augie's side of things a little bit more, what he's working on.
Yeah, so what I was trying to impress on Brandel during my, opportunity to impress on him was that there's room in the game for, another game. It's not golf, but it uses all the same skills as golf, right? So what I was trying to show him is that if you putt and play on these greens that we've created, that's as good as practicing on or playing on a, high-end traditional course. And so if we could gamify that, we're translating the skills of real golf to people that are playing a different game. And so I was just really working on this notion that there's actually room for another sport in the world that goes, it's an entry point. It really comes back to the pickleball and tennis phenomenon. Right. There was a gal that came to our dinner. We had a dinner at Arnie Palmer's restaurant in his special room with a bunch of really incredible people, and one of the gals there relayed that. She said, "Yeah, I started playing pickleball," and she said, "You know what the difference between pickleball and tennis is?" And then she answered herself. She goes, "It's just like 4 times easier to learn, right? It's just faster to get good, right?" And so that's what we've done with golf, is created, some putting only games that you can get good at really quick. And as soon as you get good at them, now you're an excellent putter. Well, that's the half the strokes in a golf round, and then you add the simulators and create the game out of that. And now you have, the true real game of golf. But the big thing with Brandel was just getting him to sort of acknowledge that there was room for this other sport, this adjacent sport. And he, obviously he did, because he joined our board of directors. I invited him one night, and the next morning I got word through Augie that he accepted. So it was a really validating feeling to ask somebody like that to join your team and, get a response. Well, I think,
Brandel and many of the others that have sort of been following your journey, I think get what it is really you're trying to accomplish. And I think it's even more than really just an entry point. Again, you've created a whole new game, if you will, because, again, when I was alluding to earlier, sort of researching some of what the millennials are looking for, is they're kind of looking for that Golf Plus experience. It's not that they don't want to get out and hit the links like we have done in the past, but they're looking for something more. They're looking for more of an entertainment value, and they're also looking for something that they can do. It might only be an hour, it might be a couple of hours, that they can have fun and be challenged and be entertained, and not necessarily have to even hit the golf course or a traditional golf course. So they're looking for a lot of different experience. And I think the problem that the industry has had for so long is rooting into traditional golf and assuming that that is the only option available. And I think what you've really done, obviously Top Golf, started to spearhead that a little bit earlier on, but you've picked up the baton, if you will, and you've even taken it even a step further, is that to let people know there, and 2020 is a great example, in the golf industry, and I'm sure you are familiar with some of the stats, but in 2020, during this pandemic, golf saw a huge uptick in new people coming to the game that had never played before. Obviously, some that had maybe dropped off for a little while, hadn't played for a while, have also come back. But what it did was it introduced people to the game. And again, a lot of people maybe didn't play very much golf or at all ever. And what you're proposing now is a way for people to be involved and enjoy it from an entertainment standpoint. And even if they don't transition into traditional golf, that's okay. It's good to have other options available, right?
Well, I mean, that was part of my original, aha, right, was, think of, now I know, all the stats of golf. Like in the U.S., the economy of golf is like an $85 billion economy. Only 10% of the population participates in that economy, right? So when you start to realize you could maybe create a fringe economy, that introduces the same skills to a new audience and maybe at 2 or 3 times as many people. So you're talking like 20 or 30 or, so percent of the population that could really get excited about this new way. And now you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of potential economic impact. And that, that's what really kind of set me aback at the beginning, was like, wow, this really needs to be done right. And once it's done right, it could be really powerful. And it takes a long time. This is highly capital intensive, right, to bring these things forward. And so when I was, paving the way, I spent a lot of time relationship building and talking to people. But, again, when it really started to take off, and is November when Augie got this inquiry, we were already sort of working on these derivatives that we talked about on your show before, what we call the golf court, which is, we'll have golf courts inside of the eGolf arena. It's a product that we're going to distribute into, hotels and in sports bars and everything. It's just a next level up beyond what exists today, sort of just beyond the golf simulator market. And so that's what we were focused on. But then when Augie called me, I was like, it brought back all the, you never let go of your dreams, right? So I hadn't really talked about a big arena project for a few years. But I told Augie the situation, and he just immediately was like, let's do it. And I said, well, I'm going to need a lot of your time, and I'm going to need a lot of design, vertical design architect time. And he was so busy, he's a vertical architect as well, but, he was so busy, he brought in this other team, Victor and Sergio Sanspont, some award-winning architects that he already knew. We had a 3-way call, and Pisa just said, look, Dave's built a whole business plan, and he's built technology that, could make a venue work, and we could literally create our own, entertainment venue. But, we need to put some of our own skin in the game. And these two guys not only stepped up, but they just really got it. They're not golfers themselves. They probably will be in our new world. But they really I think sometimes it's better to talk to a non-golfer when you're talking about this new access we're bringing forward, right? Of course, the traditional golfer is super important to us, but it's always the non-golfers that, give me the most fuel. And talking to these two guys, they just really stepped in. They're they pride themselves on being able to listen to input requirements, from their customer and deliver a physical venue that reflects what they heard. And holy smokes, right? If you look at these renderings they created, and it's not just superficial renderings. They understand the processes below this, right? This is a modular building, the modular prefabricated structural components, right? Stretched tensile strength fabric. It looks like $100 million, but we can build it for less than 30, right? So we really were challenging ourselves on that. And, then, literally they showed me the first sort of output of these renderings. So that was between November and call it April, just before Easter. And just before Easter is when I ran into Dan Meacham, who's now our CEO.
Right.
And he actually reached out to me, right? He has a group that kind of looks for people that are innovating, and he scheduled a Zoom call with me. Anyway, he's a resident of La Quinta in Coachella Valley, and that's where we had our first, experience in Indian Wells, just up the road. And so he was aware of our work already, and he knew it was a big success because he's in the neighborhood. And he started showing me other pieces of property. He was really thinking about just the putting activations, right, and expanding that. He didn't even know that I'd been working on a shell, to be sort of the new version of our original concept. But I literally had just gotten the renderings the day he shows me this lot in La Quinta that has a brand new Residence Inn by Marriott, on the same lot, and it's in the parking lot of Costco and across the street from Home Depot, and cars are just running by, and it's like the only lot. And I could tell that it was like almost exactly the size, when we were given the specs that we needed for this venue. I said, I really want it to fit on a 5-acre parcel, right? We can do about, $15-17 million of revenue on a 5-acre pad. And that's, kind of unheard of, when you think of, the economics of that compared to what, the other options are for cities and stuff to think of. So anyway, I showed Dan the renderings, and he's like, well, let's meet with the city. And so we went and had a subcommittee meeting. The mayor, Linda Evans, was there, and we showed him our pitch deck, and you could just feel the energy, right, getting bigger and bigger. A 20-minute meeting turned into an hour and 20-minute meeting, right, and really deep questions. And so we get out of that meeting, and Dan looks at me, and he just goes, Dave, I don't think I've ever been in a meeting like that before. Whatever's going on here, it's special, but you better really make sure you button up your game, because this is going to get serious, right?
Right.
And that was when, between April and now is Dan and I, relationship building, and he really dug in, and so did his dad, Charlie, who's just really one of the, most influential people in the U.S. golf industry. He was the commissioner of the LPGA for 4 years between 91 and 95. And, Jack Nicklaus asked him to take that job. He was Arnie Palmer's business advisor for the last 20 years of his life, and his neighbor, right? So a guy like this, and he's, he just had his 90th birthday. And the way Dan describes it to me is he's like, Dad gets all these pitches. And he's kind of like the Hey Mikey, right? The old cereal commercial. He just doesn't like anything because he hears so many pitches, right?
Right.
And he's like, but I shared this with him, and it caught his interest. It got his attention, because it's really about growing the game of golf. And I think everybody sort of intuitively understands that there's a gap in the access. There's room for a new access point, and when you start showing it visually, that happens. So. Anyway, now we're off and running on La Quinta, and that's going to be, sort of the gold standard, which gives us confidence we can scale this same venue into the global marketplace. And, now have given ourselves a goal of 15 or 20 of these in the next 5 years.
Well, and what's really interesting, and I just want to go back for just a second, you talked about, bringing some people in that really are not what you would typically classify as golf savvy. They're not in the golf industry. They're not really integrated within in the business. And getting their perspective, I think, is spot on for a number of reasons. Because, again, a lot of times traditional golfers, get entrenched in the sort of the regular routine of playing 18 or country club experience. And there has been a gap, and we've heard in this industry for years and years and years about growing the game, but we've always tend to focus on just one area of golf, and that is the traditional game of golf. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's great. I love playing traditional golf, but I think what you're doing here is, again, bringing in a whole different demographic. Golf really has stagnated for years. 2020 was a year that really caused a boom in the game, and not because of the game itself, but because of the pandemic. So here's a real opportunity to reach out to a very large population and introduce them to golf in a different way that has never been done before, and say to them, hey, here's an opportunity for you. And again, a percentage of them will eventually drift into traditional golf, but some of them may not. And again, as I said earlier, that's okay. But I think what you are doing here, and I think this is what's really bred a lot of the excitement, is this is something that really has not been seen before in the industry to the level that you're bringing it. And I think this is, again, why you're tracking so many, not only people within the golf industry, but even people outside of the golf industry. And it is very, very exciting, Dave, for sure. And I'm excited. So let's talk about the e-golf arena. You've scaled it now to a point where you've gotten the numbers down to a more manageable level than what typically might be looked at. When do you plan on, when is this going to start, as you said, brick and mortar, when is this going to start being developed as we move forward?
Well, so we're able to, we just got our endorsement from, Scott White, who runs the Coachella Valley Visitors Bureau today. And what a heartfelt endorsement, to the mayor, who's been also incredibly supportive. So we're working hand in glove with the city as they break down all the barriers, and sort of the mission we have together is just to, not allow any mistakes in the sense of something we didn't think of where we could have gone faster, right, if we had thought of it. And so there's a lot of pre-planning. Our current goal is to have blueprint, ready submission, for construction, inside of 6 months from today. And really internally we're still beating to a drumbeat. These buildings aren't as complex as typical brick and mortar building, right? They're footings and and stuff like that. So we're still targeting sort of end of 22 internally, but in reality it could be into 23. But there's so much confidence now because of the way the technology has matured and the way we've been able to watch people interface with it and all that there's really not a fear that these venues are not going to be game changing or successful. Of course, we need to learn how to, operate them properly. And we're, that's a lot of the steps we're taking today is, how do we go make sure we have our game on when the venue opens? But we're right now going after funding so that we can have 5 of these up in the U.S. market before the end of 23. And that's only 27. That's only 27 months from now. So Pete Walsh is one of our board members as well. Pete was the CIO for Jerry Jones on the Dallas Cowboys when they were building AT&T Stadium, and now he works for a company called Lumen Technology. Lumen thinks of themselves as sort of the 4th industrial internet, right? They've got, all this millions of miles of fiber and things laid down. All you really have to know is their top 2 clients are Zoom and Salesforce.com, right? And if you look at what the priorities of those companies are, it's connecting a bunch of people via technology and video that are anywhere, at any time. And so all of these venues are also going to be smart venues, right? They're going to be they'll be able to talk to each other, and we'll be able to have people competing in one venue with people competing in another venue. And, that level of strategic thinking, requires, really having, a strong origin and a strong foundation. And that's really truly why this team is forming, because they can see that it's mature and it's ready to go. And so then, when a guy like Pete steps in and starts using his expertise, and he told me really the real barrier to scaling will be making sure you have your capital figured out early enough. And, my story, right? So, capital is king, and it's really, really difficult to get your hands on, especially when you're still developing. But now, if you look at Topgolf's origin, that's how they actually got off the ground, right? They got an arrangement with a real estate investment company that, paid their capital expenses for the first 10 or 12 venues or something. So we're real close now. We feel good about our plan to get that capital. And the other thing he said is, so it's just, having the capital ready and then entitlements, from the properties that you're going to go get, right? It takes a while to, work with cities and work with governments and find ideal properties. When you think about a guy like Charlie Meacham in Cincinnati, right? He was really close friends with the first man on the moon, Neil Armstrong in Cincinnati. And Dan grew up with Armstrong kids and GE Cincinnati, headquarters for GE Aviation, right? I have a million friends there. And so one of our target locations will probably be Cincinnati, because we think we'll have, a lot of people that want to work with us there and get through the entitlements. And that's the process we're going through the city. so we understand it, and we're like, oh, this isn't so hard. So we get the money, we get the entitlements. If you think about 5 venues, Ted, you can pretty much nail them already, right? So there's that one. Remember our history with the Native American tribes, and I've built a really incredible relationship with a guy named Ernie Stevens, whose dad is the chairman of NIGA, the Native American Gaming Association. And, he and I have been dreaming about where we're going to put one of these arena projects. And, he's teeing up right there next to Lambeau Field where they're building a big sports complex, all kinds of entertainment and stuff there. So, I could see that one coming to fruition really easily. So now you're up to 3, right? And then the last 2 are pretty much no-brainers because there's got to be one in Dallas, if you're going to the center of gravity for this entire off-course movement, and also now the new HQ for the PGA, is all in Dallas. So you can't change the game without dropping a footprint in Dallas. So now we're at 4. And then, the last one, there's no way that Las Vegas is going to allow 5 of these to go up without being one of them, right? So right there is 5, right? So I'm already, ready, as soon as I know that we've got the capital support, which is, we're deadly close to that, we're going to go start building these bridges and identifying the other lots, and they'll all have their own cycle time. But by building 5 in the same year, we can take advantage of the economy of scales in terms of ordering raw materials and trying to deal with some of the, COVID challenges of supply chain, right, and whatnot. So, any idea, Ted, you'll hear this all the time. Any idea is a good idea once it's accepted and adopted by enough people, right? It's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. And now we've just got, these doors opening for us. I mean, let me just share one meeting that happened this morning. So you remember I have a relationship with Peter McAvoy, who was the British amateur champion in the 70s. He's been in European Tour player development, ever since the 70s. If you asked, if you put his name and said who's one of the most high character, most impactful people in all of European golf sports, and his name was on the list, I bet you 7 out of 10 are putting him in the top 1 or 2. That's the kind of credibility he has. And so today I was able to connect him to Dan, right? Because now Dan and I have developed our relationship to the point where we really trust each other. And, you have to go through a lot of hurdles to earn the trust of people at this level with this kind of character and this kind of authenticity, right? They just really ask all the hard questions. And if you don't have the answers, you're dead. That's why it took a long time. But sitting here listening to Dan and Peter talk, and the reason that's so special is when you think about creating a sport, right, here I'm thinking, gosh, I've got Peter who has this massive network into the European tour bodies, all of his friends, right? And then you have Charlie with his massive connection in the U.S. How hard is it going to be for us to get the PGA Tour and the European Tour to be sort of following us along and starting to build, what is the competitive league format structure for the off-course sport, right? So when you have people buying into this kind of level of concept, then those are the next things that start to happen. And there is it took me a long time to find people that think as big as I do. And boy, I'm surrounded with them in spades now.
Well, you're exactly right. When you start to attract that type of attention and people start to get, you've had this vision for a very, very long time. I know you've, had to reprocess it and rethink about a lot of different things as you've gone along. But your core vision has always, relatively been the same. And I think once people understand that and sort of take a peek in the window and say, okay, yeah, I understand what it is he's trying to do. It's like a domino effect. Once one domino goes down, it hits several others and just keeps going. And, it takes time. I know you've been working on this, Dave, for a long, long time. And you've obviously brought in certain things to fruition and that has helped obviously with the success and getting attention and drawing these people into that circle. And I think this is fantastic because, again, I love golf from all different angles. I love watching the tours and seeing how they do things. But there has been something kind of missing. And so many other sports offer different types of access to their sport and different ways of entertaining. And golf has really been sort of the last, man to the show. And I think what you're bringing to the table, and others obviously that have come before you, have started sort of igniting that fire. And I think what's really unique about this is I can see a million applications that can be added to it. Like you said, a lot of the different venues that you're looking at right now, places like Las Vegas, this again brings a whole different level of entertainment. And there's not really a lot out there right now in the golf arena for people to do other than traditional golf. Most people are not going to ever make it on the tour and may not even play in some of the other leagues that are available. So either we have a choice of, in a teaching game side of golf or playing in some other fashion, or we look for other opportunities. And that's exactly what you're bringing to the table with Nextlinks and with the golf arenas. Talk a little bit about the layout. Let's discuss about that. What's actually going to be in it that people are going to have to look forward to?
Yeah, so the renderings that you see, we didn't have a lot yet, a physical location to build the product, but, we talked about, what size to make it and sort of had the notional size of this 5-acre lot. So the renderings you see, that's actually about a 430-foot diameter building. When we ran into the lot in La Quinta, I just realized, okay, there's going to be one here, over my dead body, right? This is happening. And so I asked Dan, I said, Dan, do you mind if I just paste this lot, right? And, I pasted off. So we ended up scaling the design down to about 165-foot radius, so 330 feet diameter. And 85, so if you do the, pi r squared of an area of a circle, it's 85,000 square feet on the first floor, and then there's a mezzanine level with 26,000 square feet. There'll be 22 simulator screens in the venue. We'll have all kinds of different ways of activating the simulator screens between standalone activities, like you're hitting at a bay at a Topgolf. One of the elements that I really took as tremendous value when I studied what's going on in the entertainment driving range model was this notion that you can show up with a group of 10 people and hang out in a single location, and 2 or 3 of the people might be interfacing with the game, but the other 7 are engaged with them because it's you're watching them and you're commenting on them, and it creates an interaction. And
right.
So just having that stay in place entertainment, it also allows you then to bring F&B. So that was a critical element, to our design philosophy, because really making money off these places is about, pre-booking special events and parties. So 22 simulator screens. There'll probably be 50 or 60 standalone putting zones, right? What we call shots in the night. And we're designing some of those greens right now. But they'll be spread out over about a 40,000 foot area that Pisa and Chambly, I'm sure, will weigh in too. The idea is the deliverable there is something that looks magical, right? Something that's worthy of a Pisa Chambly design, right? Augie has a design he calls the Pit. It's in the backyard of a guy in Mexico City, and I just saw it a couple of weeks ago when I went and visited Augie there. And we're going to actually, scan and print that exact design and put it, sort of as a feature, inside this venue. And it's just gorgeous, right? The steep face sand traps and stuff like that. So the whole venue can be broken down into, 50, 60, 70, 80 party zones, right? There's 22 sim screens. So each of those areas around a sim screen has a big putting green area. And so think of those as like a party for 50 people, right? If you wanted to have a sim screen plus a putting green. So we have 22 parties for 50 people, that could be going on concurrently. And the whole place just looks like a giant, gorgeous indoor park because, of what Sandspon did with taking the aesthetic design so seriously. And then, it'll have 50,000 square feet of commercial, right? F&B, other kinds of activations. It'll have full teaching. I mean, this is going to be the complete game of golf, but being able to be delivered as party entertainment or as serious competitive play. And that's what our intellectual property does. That's why really people are getting behind this, right? Because they can see the robustness of our patent, and they're like, holy smokes, nobody can even copy this because you can't make this combined design without patent infringement. And so it gives people a lot of confidence. And what we've really been talking about a lot is the importance of the women's game, right? So I've been getting to know women leaders in golf now for years. I think of like Alyssa Gaudet with Women's Golf Day has done an amazing job. I think of Clemmy Perry with Women of Color Golf, right, who's done an amazing job in Florida. I was on a panel with both of them at the PGA show with Colin Weston back in 2018, that we set up called the Disruptors panel, and, got to know them. And then there's gals like Gianna Rojas, that, the one-handed lady golfer.
Yep.
Right? So these are all relationships that I have that we're really looking forward to now working with in earnest about, how do we bring the women's game forward and have this really be, the access point for, learning for the women's game, because, there is an intimidation factor that has kept women out of the game going out to the traditional course. It's a very intimidating place to take your first swings. And then of course Annika, right, and her leadership, right? So, I see all those coming into play, and us having just an incredible access point and social arena, for women and juniors, specifically. You don't have to worry about the golfers, right? They're going to love what you deliver because it's better than anything else that's not golf, right? They're never, and me included, you're always going to want the traditional game if you're a golfer. But my real driver was being able to play the traditional game 2 or 3 or 4 times a year and still shoot 75, right? Because I'm working on my skills in a way, it's hard to make yourself practice to the degree where you could play and shoot 75 if you're only going to play 3 or 4 times a year, right? Going to the driving range gets a little, monotonous. And honestly, the driving range entertainment venues, it doesn't feel like you're really working on your game. It's not the same as going to a range, right? So, having the ability to just hone the skills, and by the way, we proved this, right? So we had this putting green in our lab, and my team was already playing scramble tournaments a lot, before we had our putting green, because, we were together. And then, 6 months after we installed this putting green and we were playing this Nextlinks challenge against each other all the time, we'd be out on the golf course and we'd start being like, oh, this putt reminds me of that putt, right? That we've hit 1,000 times, and then we make the putt and then we win the tournament, right? And so it was obvious that the skills translate to us, so, Dan and I have been talking about really bringing some players that have never experienced traditional golf. And this is something I've been thinking about for a long time, and introducing the entire game to them and not even allowing them to go to a traditional course. Right. And then the first time they go out, they shoot, sub 90. I mean, it'll blow their minds, and they're going to want to play the game forever. Right.
Right. And and what's really interesting? Yeah. What's really interesting, Dave, is something you said about really introducing the game, particularly to women. For instance, as a good example, I mean, last year there was roughly 400,000 new female golfers to the game. But on the flip side of that, because of accessibility and because of really an intimidation factor of not feeling confident in themselves out in the golf course quite yet, it can be very intimidating all the way around. So really, just as you proved in your lab, what this will really do for a lot of people that, again, have never played this game, it gives them an accessibility to the game that's less intimidating, that's fun, gives them a chance to work on their skills in a more relaxed environment. I mean, there's nothing worse for a new golfer to be out there on the practice tee with a qualified instructor that has never picked up a golf club before, and they're expected to perform. And the instructor's looking at them, at what they're doing. And it can be very intimidating, particularly for women, because I know I've talked to many first-time golfers who were women, and they've all said the same thing. It's very intimidating, even walking into the pro shop. So this is really, I think, going to do, not just for the women, but for everybody that has typically not had the same exposure that maybe you and I did at an early age to traditional golf is going to kind of wet their whistle a little bit and allow them an opportunity to get exposed, build some confidence, so that when they decide to say, hey, you know what, I want to take this to the next level and I want to go out and play some golf, they're going to be well adversed in the game and have a general understanding without even actually having to take a lesson. And that's what really makes it exciting, is the fact that they can do that.
No, it's incredible. Did you see the so you know, Steph was at the Ryder Cup, Steph Curry, working for NBC. He did an interview with Michael Jordan beforehand, and they talked for like 5 minutes. I posted it on LinkedIn. It's pretty amazing when you listen to these guys talk, these professional athlete basketball players, and they just absolutely love the game of golf. Steph asked MJ, right, because he's retired. He said, how do you balance? Like, sometimes I feel like I'm playing too much golf, right? I'm not playing enough basketball, right? But that's the pull this game has once you get good at it, is it just consumes you. And then you know, Michael Jordan says, you know, it's the only game I've ever found besides basketball that allows me to compete, you know, that allows me to really compete. And the great part of it is that you're really just competing with yourself in this game, right? So
right.
So it just gives him that fuel that he needs. You know, when you're a competitor, you need to be competing, right? And you can't compete at a physical sport like basketball forever. So, but back to the women, right? You know, in my corporate days, you know, my boss was a gal named Caroline Rita for a while. She was the the CEO of GE Nuclear in Japan, you know, when the tsunami hit. You know, she was overseeing nuclear and all these crises, but she really recognized the importance of corporate golf, right, of golf in the corporate environment, and she took it up and brought me out playing. And you know, when you think about like corporate success, having a sport that doesn't really provide equal access for men and women is a problem. You know, you really want the women executives and the women up-and-comers and the women in general to have the opportunity to play this game and go out with their male counterparts as a, you know, in a foursome and have a blast together. And it's, you know, there's a lot of women that can do that. Like, you know, my mom's a pretty good golfer, and but there's just so many that are just too intimidated at the beginning. They're just afraid to begin the process. And you know, if we can help them begin the process by introducing them to, you know, putting first, right? So back in the lab, you know, people would come in and they'd even be afraid and intimidated to try the putting, right? When you stand in front of people and have to do something you've never done before, it's not easy, you know. And when you first hit a putt on greens that roll 12 on the stimp meter, in all likelihood you're going to hit it about 6 times farther than, you know, you should have.
At least.
But within like 5 minutes you start to get it, right? So you know, I've seen non-golfers now over the years, and you know, people in Phoenix, they would show up and they didn't even really recognize the game there as golf, right? I literally, one guy, he goes, it reminds me of billiards, just, you know, stand-up billiards, right? Because it was, you know, a sport that we had created on a putting green that uses a mallet that this guy had never really seen before. But he was getting good at that game that he didn't even relate to as a golf game, right? And that, you know, a lot of people, you know, I got to credit you, Ted, for like my relationships. Like, so I have people that listened to our first interview that began following me because of your first interview. And then I have other friends that listened to your second interview and began following me. And then same with the third, and you know, these people. So I always know when somebody listened to the first interview, because I was living in an apartment building when I really was grinding, when I first quit my job, and it was really scary, right? Trying to, you know, build a company out of scratch by yourself and with these big dreams and visions. So I would go down to the hot tub at our community and I would just pitch to people, whoever was there. And it was always the non-golfers that would engage me and say, wow, I don't golf, but that sounds like fun. And so I always called the hot tub my boardroom. So, you know, whenever I talk about my boardroom, somebody says, oh, you mean the hot tub? Then I know they listened to your interview.
I remember that well. You know, it's so great, and I mean, it's been a pleasure to you know, have you on the show, and you know, you have an open door policy here. You're always welcome to come back on, and I love, you know, hearing as things have progressed along, And it's you always, as you pointed out earlier, there's a lot of people that you come across that have a great vision or have a vision of some sort, and you think, okay, yeah, that's pretty nice and what have you, and yeah, it'd be great if that happens, and it doesn't really come. But you've really stuck to it, and you've really, you've adapted, you've adjusted along the way, and you've stuck to it, and that, I think that's really what stands you apart from so many. There's a lot of great ideas out there, as you've mentioned earlier, but many fall by the wayside. And it'd be interesting, in the trash can of ideas, how many got thrown out because the individual that started with that idea didn't stick with it.
Well, I'm telling you, all we have to do is look at our own 6.5-year journey, right? Almost everybody is a dead body on the road next to me now. When you decide that you'd rather die than fail, right?
Yep.
You start to get comfortable with mortality. And when you live in that mentality every day for 6.5 years, one day you wake up and all of a sudden you have peace because you realize you're just chasing your dream. So here, my dream was to become a relevant. I was a global business leader in the oil and gas and energy divisions, and then in the aviation division. But those were jobs, right? I wasn't passionate about oil and gas, and I wasn't passionate about aviation. But I saw people that were, and I was always envious of them, right? So what I've always loved is golf, and my dream was to convert my career into a golf career. And make a big difference, in the process. And so I'm on the phone with Peter McAvoy today, and he goes to Dan, towards the end, and he goes, Dan, I just want to tell you one thing about Dave. He goes, in terms of determination, there's nobody on this planet that has more determination than Dave does. And he's right, in a lot of ways, and it comes with a lot of sacrifice. Don't get me wrong, but it's but it's worth it because people always say you've got to find something that's more important to you than living, right? Yep. And it's bigger than your life. You're never going to accomplish the goal, right? I'm never going to accomplish all my goals before I die. So that gets you comfortable with that, and you're just trying to get as far as you can, right? And it's fun. It's fun for me. It's fun for me now just to know that that's where I'm at in my life, and then everything is about trying to empower other people and create opportunities for other people. And now I'm beginning to see these people that have stuck by my side and believed in me, and now all these new support people are showing up, and so the real joy for me is when we start creating jobs and we start letting other people move into something that they love because we did the hard work to make it happen. And I just can't wait for that. So it's happening daily, but I'm really in a peaceful place in my mind now and comfortable with everything and even comfortable with these big goals. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but my original goal was 100 venues by 2025, and that was in 2015. So now we're still looking at 15 venues, and considering you have to have a goal when you start something, or you're never going to get there. And it took a long time to kind of get over that line of super credibility with the industry, with really capable people, and so that delayed us a little bit. But I think we'll have 100 venues by 2030, and I'll be pretty proud of that if that happens.
I couldn't agree more. Well, Dave, I'm always excited to listen to the next chapter, and I've enjoyed this evening. And unfortunately, we're out of time. I hate to say it, but we're actually out of time. It was a great hour, though. I enjoyed having you on. And as I said, you are always welcome to come back, and I hope you come back real soon. And as things progress and update not only my audience, but particularly update me as well as to what's going on. But you always have a home here on Golf Talk Live, and I was looking, and I believe this is actually visit number 5 that you've been on here. So, I think it is number 5. I'm going to double check in the morning. I should have double checked before we got on live tonight, but I believe it is number 5. So, you've been a pretty regular guest over the years, and it's always a pleasure to have you on. But
can people still find those old interviews if they wanted to? Could you go all the way back to 2016?
They can go to Blog Talk. they can go to blogtalkradio.com/Golf Talk Live and just scroll down through the on-demand section in the archives there, and they can get access to all of those previously aired interviews. So, yeah, for sure they can do that. But, Dave, I want to thank you.
Well,
I want to thank you for coming on tonight.
Appreciate you and your audience, Ted. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Not a problem. And good luck with everything going through the rest of 2021, and much continued success. And please keep me in the loop. Let me know how things go. And, again, you're always welcome to come back here on Golf Talk Live. But thanks, Dave, for stopping by tonight.
Certainly will. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. That was my very special guest, Dave Shultz, founder of Nextlinks. Lots of good information discussed tonight about the eGolf arena. We'll give you more information as it comes through, but I think it's going to be very, very exciting, and obviously some big players coming in, Brandel Chambly and Dan Meacham as well, and many others that have been involved now here more recently, but all of those that have supported Dave along the way, and I've certainly been one of them. I want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening. Particular thanks again to Dave Shultz, founder of Nextlinks. Thanks for being my special guest, and also to my good friend and buddy Clint Wright for doing a great job on the earlier Coaches Corner panel segment. On that note, God bless everybody. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week right here on Golf Talk Live.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this week's broadcast of Golf Talk Live. We'd like to thank this week's Coaches Corner panel, and a special thank you to tonight's guest. Remember to join Ted every Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. Central on Golf Talk Live. And be sure to follow Ted on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you're interested in being a guest on Golf Talk Live, send Ted an email at ted.golftalklive@gmail.com. This has been a production of the iGolf Sports Network.